Welcome back, MTG Joe here. Today we are going to do our first ever inaugural weekly meta breakdown for the Timeless format. We finally got the stats from UntappedGG. They updated their backend and we got some early data in to see what are the highest performing decks. We're going to start with a best of one video. We're going to give it a couple more days for best of three, and then we'll be able to present a best of three video as well. But generally what we do with this is we look at the highest win rate decks each week. We break it up between best of one, best of three. So we do this for, in this case, the Timeless meta, but we'll also be doing it for Explorer, Historic, Standard, as we've been doing for the last couple of years. So you can check that out weekly on my channel if you're interested in any of that. I'll timestamp and paste all the deck lists for those of you who are new. If you want to get started with Untapped, link is in the video description. It tracks your win rates, aggregates other users, really good, useful tool. Link is in there, let them know that I sent you. And we'll jump into it. So we always start off with popularity of decks, and then we look at the win rate. Now, I always stress a popular deck doesn't necessarily correlate to the highest win rate deck. Could be for budget reasons, flavor of the week, like a streamer played it maybe, whatever it is, kind of going from there. So we are going to take a look and see. So we're looking December 12th through 17th, but just popularity of the day is today only, so that you could ignore this. We'll do a 1 week span basically from the release of the format. For this, we're going to look Platinum to Mythic, but for the actual win rates, we'll look Diamond to Mythic just to kind of eliminate the noise as much as possible. I like to look at the higher end where things tend to be a little bit more competitive. Grixis Shadow is the most played deck of the format right now, at just a shade under 15%. So usually combination, so a lot of these decks are like the core is the same and then tweaks around the edges. We have Rakdos Midrange at 9.4%. We have Jund Midrange. So kind of just flavors of red-black with other supplementary cards. We have Mono Red Burn at 6.5%. Mono Black Control, which is like the Necropotence Dark Ritual deck. 5-color Domain, which is not your standard 5-color Domain. It's Domain Zoo. Sultai Midrange we have at 4.9%. And then Is It Tempo at 4.8%. So kind of coming around there. So usually we'll start looking at trend lines, but it's still pretty early right now, so we're not going to see too much in terms of deviation. As we start accumulating weeks worth of data, then we can start seeing like larger kind of ebbs and flows of the meta itself. Right now, you're only seeing small percentage points that are coming in. So for Timeless, we are looking December 12th through to the 17th, 5 days. Diamond Mythic rank, there's 14,000 games played. Just kind of see it a curiosity. If we go to Historic, so Timeless has actually played more games than Historic best of one right now, which is interesting to see where the dichotomy goes. Let me know in the comments if you've like fully abandoned Historic for Timeless. I feel like I personally am. Everything that I wanted of Historic, I'm getting out of this format here. But we're going to take a look. Untapped does allow us to search for like up to 50 game samples. So it's 5 days in. I wouldn't overreact on any of these, but we're starting to get some of the results coming in. Highest win rate deck is Rakdos Burn, actually. So 78.7% over 75 games. Really impressive win rate. And the thing to note with, I feel like a lot of people are encountering fetch lines for the first time. They're being very aggressive in the manner in which they are fetching and shocking themselves. So that's something you could kind of play around in the context of this, like how you build your deck. You can usually punish them. The one thing I'll say with this mana base, you can probably, especially because you are on an Eidolon here, get rid of the Sulfurous Springs, play a little bit more basics. You can up the amount of Bloodstained Mire. You can forego Bloodstained Mire if you'd like. It's kind of up to you. I just think with having effectively 6 pain lines accompanying the Eidolon, you're going to hurt yourself, where you're going to try to break parity in the games that you're playing. So the mana base could potentially get a little bit better. There is a second Rakdos Burn list, I think. This version is actually on 16 lands, which is a little low, all things considered. This one, 16 lands as well. So really just kind of pushing the limits on lands in this deck. But you could probably forego maybe like Mount Doom, perhaps. Kind of play around with that. But the core of the deck is play burn spells. You have Bump of the Night, which is another bolt, Lightning Bolt, Play with Fire, Skewer the Critics as a couple copies. Eidolon in here to kind of ping at your opponent, Ragavans, you have DRCs and Monastery Swiftspears. Akiba Reckoner can gain you some life and drain, and then light up the stage's card advantage along with the Mishra's Bauble. So you are able to kind of grind out in the sense that you have recurring ways to deal damage. The thing here you have is access only really to one, well, I guess 8 1-mana answers if you're on the play, but having Bowmaster is another way to punish. These get turned on fairly easy as well. But you have access to Bowmaster, you have answers to Akiba. If we look quickly at that other Rakdos version, a couple percentage points lower at 66. And again, this is where to go. This is still fairly early, so no DRC in this version. It's playing Static Discharge. It's also playing full Spikefield Hazard, so this one's really on 20 lands, which helps a bit. And it's also playing Searing Blood. So no Eidolon here, so that's something interesting to see how it plays out in practice if the Eidolon ends up being the better kind of configuration. You also see like Mono Red Burn, very similar concept, but Bone Crusher's main, One Rings, and Vortex. So there's a few different variations and things that I'm going to want to try out with a couple of these different burn lists in the coming weeks. I put out a bunch of different videos, best of 1, best of 3 of gameplay, but it's continuing to kind of learn the format and get a feel for it. But promising results thus far with this list. We then go to Jund Midrange, Zoomer Jund at 77% after 70 games played. And a card I didn't really think would see much play in the format, Tarmogoyf, is accompanying one of the highest win rate decks. So Deathrite Shaman and Bowmaster, the 2 best creatures in the format. Full DRC, Ragavan, you got Bolts, you have Thought Seizes, Fatal Pushes, a number of ways to enable Revolt in the deck. Goyf, I guess the bonus is if you're playing against a lot of red-based decks, like Fatal Push is kind of the only answer. We're not seeing as many like Swords to Plowshare style decks. So this kind of outscales some of that damage. People are naturally filling up their yard, so you get just a big beater there. Questing Druid gets you some card advantage outside of like the traditional kind of Brainstorm style effects. A lot of duels here. This version's only on 6 fetches, which could likely increase as well. You'd probably just want to trim these 2 Copperline Gorges and play the full set of Wooded Foothills. Just to kind of offset here, you really want to be able to fetch your various lands as well to enable Revolt and then feed your Deathrite Shaman as well. So some of the mana bases are probably still evolving as we play through more games. Then go to Rakdos Midrange, and this one is at 74%. So very similar concept. This one's straight black-red. I would suggest it's not in the mana base right now, but you should play one either Overgrown Tomb or Stomping Ground just to be able to fetch for your Deathrite Shaman. This will allow you to activate its second mode to exile creatures. Can be very handy against things like Uro or just gaining you life. This deck does a lot of damage to itself. Interesting here, I put up the question early on, like, is Demonic Tutor something you always include? This version is probably a little bit more controlling. Notably, it's going Inquisition over Thoughtseize main, so more playing to the Lurrus decks. And sorry, I should mention that Jund deck was also a Lurrus deck as well as the Rakdos Burn deck. Sorry, keep forgetting that this is a Lurrus format. But very similar concepts, Ragavan, Bolts, Inquisition over Thoughtseize, Deathrite, and Dragon Rage. So this saves you some life. You don't hit Minx, you don't hit Omnath, you don't hit a Jengantha in hand, so a little bit of playing to the meta to see how it is. Go Blank's actually quite a big back-breaking card against a lot of the decks in the format. You have Kroxa, which is at times a little bit of a liability with Deathrite, and then opting to go with the full 4 Edict, giving you some answers to Planeswalker's main, but does limit your ability to target directly if they have multiple creatures and you can't kind of force them. So interesting inclusion there. The mana base 20 lands, and then you have your fetches kind of mixed into there. Then go to 5-color Domain. This is the deck I've been playing variations of. This deck's very fun. I'm like 7-2 in different versions of it. So this version here is on Deathrite Shaman. The one I'm playing has a couple copies of Oko. I've actually trimmed the copies of Stubborn Denial down to 2, and I'm playing some Treasure Cruises in the deck. I've liked just the recurring card advantage. Stubborn Denial, while great when you can get Nashiba Brawler out or Territorial Kavu, they're really your only 4 power. I just find it inconsistent. Like, this is a port of the modern deck, but you have that Scion of Urza, I think, the colorless creature that also enables that. But like Regavan doesn't turn it on, Wild Nacatl doesn't turn it on, and it oftentimes is just a bad force spike. But this deck's been very impressive, both the combination of Bolt and just folks doing so much damage to themselves with Tribal Flames hits them that way there. I like the Okos because it plays around the heavy removal matchups. And then Treasure Cruise, you're naturally filling your yard because you're playing 12 fetches. And they're killing your stuff anyways, so it lets you just kind of draw some extra cards. So for context, we can pull up my list. I have a video on this deck. It's very impressive. My only 2 losses were to Rakdos, where they had a whole bunch of Thoughtseizes in the opener, and to 4-color Omnath that had Omnath and fetch lines going, and I just couldn't beat it with that. But 2 Stubborn Denial, the Orcish Bowmaster is getting played in the deck as well, 3 Okos, 3 Treasure Cruises. If you are going to play this version here, my suggestion is I ended up just cutting the Forest and playing a Stomping Ground. The way you have to be mindful of the way you're fetching in this deck. But there was times I wanted a red-green land, and I wasn't able to fetch it accordingly. So that's one thing that made the switch. This deck's fairly soft to Blood Moon anyways. While you can proactively kind of fetch around, there's too many colors you want to hedge on. And ultimately, I just valued having the plains, because if I could hit Leyline Binding, then I can get rid of the Blood Moon. But you're going to get hit pretty hard regardless, I think, against Blood Moon. So there's certain games where you're going to hedge, other games you're not. But if you want to see my lists and stuff, just check out the video in the playlist. We then go to, they're calling this Grixis Shadow, but it's Grixis Dredge. And this deck actually didn't get much outside of the fetch lines. And this was already a reasonable deck in the format, whether it be Sultai, Dimir, or Grixis in the historic format. So you're playing Faithless Looting, Otherworldly Gaze, Citrus Supplier, you're self-milling, you're dredging back prize amalgams. With the fetch lines, you have a number of ways to enable Bloodghast now. You can even hold the lands, which is nice. To enable you to do it like each turn. So it's kind of 2 revives of Bloodghast. Ox of Agonis for card advantage. Very easy to fill your yard, especially when you're using Glimpse the Unthinkable. So if you're looking for kind of a historic deck that you can fairly easily port over, you just got to craft your fetches. And crafting the fetches is probably the safest thing you could do in this format. And reasonable win rate, all things considered. Now, my pride and joy. This is my deck, and it's very impressive. Yesterday, it had a rough day. Yesterday when I took the snapshot, it was at 69%, so we dropped 6%. I don't know what's happening, but this is my Blood Moon deck. I featured it early. The gameplay is up. I played it in best of 3, but I think it's reasonable best of 1. And this I played a version of this during historic All Access. Now keep in mind that's not the toughest competition, but I did go 20-0 at one point with the deck, which was wild. So card considerations. Dragon Rage Chandler. I ended up cutting the Swift Spheres from it and playing a little bit more control-y oriented. In best of 1, so you can get rid of the Bauble and play, what's its name? The Companion, the 3 mana, or like the odd Companion that doubles damage. Honestly, I ended up just putting it to hand and discarding it to Pyro more than anything. It also foretells a bit of information and kind of gives people foreshadowing that you're likely going to be a Blood Moon deck. But I like Bauble, plays really well with DRC. It draws you cards, which lets you thin out your deck more, and enables Delirium, helps you kind of churn over. This version here has 10 1-mana answers to a lot of the threats in the format. Lightning Bolt, Unholy Heat, which scales really well. The Bauble also helps Delirium here, as well as Spikefield Hazard. Regavan, DRC, then you have your Blood Moons. Bonecrusher Giant, I think, is really reasonable in the format, just being removal and then a tough body that also deals some damage when it gets killed. Fable, and then Seasoned Pyromancer. So obviously Bowmaster is very representative. That's why I have basically 14 removal spells for Bowmaster. So you could get these going. Pyro with Fable often can win the game. Similarly, Fable with Ox of Agonis is huge value. Just a lot of recursive ways. I wanted cards that if they did get flipped into the graveyard, you don't lose it, especially if you need to delve or delirium or flip, whatever it's called. Surveil. into your graveyard. The changes I made to the mana base, you can actually go up one more Ramen up and down to 8 mountains if you'd like. I'm playing 4 fetches, again, to enable DRC, help fill your graveyard, slightly thin out your deck. But in some matches, Blood Moon's going to be really good. Other matches, you're just going to discard it. So I wanted some utility lands, but I didn't want to overboard on lands that hurt you. Fiery Islet can be used in a pinch. Similarly, we've done to the Bugbear. If this wasn't a Blood Moon deck, I'd be playing 3 to 4 of the Dens, and then 4 Ramen Up Ruins, and then 2 to 3 of the Fiery Islets. But probably my favorite deck of the format. Another deck I didn't think would be doing that well, but putting up some results is Natural Order Elves, 61%. This deck's very kind of weak at times to early aggressive Bowmaster drops, but you're using Allosaurus Shepherd. Basically the core of the deck, play Elves, Natural Order into Craterhoof, and kind of overwhelm. A lot of accelerants, Dwindlin's Elite, Elvish Clangcaller, Gala Greeters in here, I guess just makes you mana, but it's a little susceptible. You probably want to trim on the Gala Greeters, play a couple more Allosaurs. You should be playing the full Elvish Archdruids. So this card's not really that great. So honestly, cut these. Play 4, 4, 4. I actually don't hate either Sylvan Anthem or like another Clangcaller. This kind of gets you out of Bowmaster range. But you should be playing, again, the full set of Collected Company in this deck. So there's definitely ways you could kind of tweak this. Maybe cut, play some Collected Companies. This is a general idea on the shelf if you want to get going. But you play a lot of like Elves, and then you overrun your opponent either through lots of mana, being pumped into Allosaurus Shepherd or Elvish Warmaster, or always being able to tutor into Craterhoof Behemoth, kind of winning that way there. Cavern of Souls provides some utility from all your Elves to make them uncounterable if needed. Then we go to Mono Black Control. Mono Black Control was at, forgive me, being a little particular this week, 57%. It's showing and then it doesn't come up. I was doing this for the standard video the other day, but this is the Dark Ritual Necropotence. Hope you're on the play. 4 of all your cards. So another deck that's not terribly difficult to get into if you have a historic deck. You're not playing swamps, so you're fine, or fetches. Well, I would argue playing a couple fetches wouldn't be the end of the world because you do have Fatal Push. This deck, you're really just crafting Dark Rituals and Necropotence. I will say, though, you're probably limited to either playing this deck by crafting those or like the Rakdos Necropotence deck with Lelia. That's kind of a combo. But Fatal Pushes, lots of hand hate, Bowmasters. Liliana's an interesting one. Like getting it out on turn 1 is pretty reasonable, but at the same time, in a world of Bowmaster, the minus isn't great, and then it just gets pinged on the flip side. Things that might be more reasonable or to try out are things like Graveyard Trespasser, maybe. I think the Ward is reasonable. There's a contention over the graveyards. I would even consider maybe trimming on the numbers of like the discard effects and playing Dragon or Deathrite Shaman. You probably also don't need 24 lands if you're on like Dark Ritual Necro, which is usually what you're going to try to hit. So you can probably trim there. If you play some fetches, you play Deathrite Shaman. It also helps with like some utility. You can play a Overgrown Tomb that also enables it that way. So some considerations. Also helps with like the life loss. Sheoldred, One Ring, kind of topping it up on the top end. Grixis Shadow. So the most played deck is actually like 8th in win rate. So 54%. A couple different versions of playing the deck. I have a video up on it. I went with Treasure Cruise. This version is on Expressive Iteration, Underworld Breach. Bonuses to both. From sheer card advantage, the Cruise is 1 mana, draw 3 oftentimes in the deck. But it can trigger your opponent's Bowmasters. Expressive, you can't play it early necessarily, but it gets you cards in hand getting around Bowmaster. This version's on Underworld Breach to replay some of your stuff. I don't know how I feel about Underworld Breach. I think, like I saw an Izzet combo deck that was self-milling and winning with Thassa's Oracle. I think in that context it makes sense. But in the value game, I don't know how great it is. I also think in Best of One, it's wrong to not play the full set of Fatal Push. You need to get rid of your opponent's Bowmasters, getting rid of their early creatures, especially if you're on a Brainstorm plan. You're going to want to deal with your opponent's stuff. I would definitely play the full set of Fatal Push. And again, with Treasure Cruise, it's actually pretty easy to get it on fairly early. Like if you go fetch, shock, or fetch, play DRC, bobble, surveil into the graveyard, sack the bobble. That's already like 3 cards into your yard on turn 1, so you can get it fairly early going. This is Alura's Companion. My list was slightly different, but if you want to see gameplay, it's up as well. I went 4-1 over the games, just losing to the mirror in the games that I played. Then go to 4-color Omnath, greed pile, 53%. So if you want to spend every single wild card you own, Hope, Desire, this is very close to my list. I went full Omnath here, but it's basically a Bant control splash couple cards. Lightning Bolt is early interaction, along with Swords to Plowshare. Omnath on your top end. Field of Dead is included here. Field of Dead with the shock, with the fetch lands is very good, as well as with Omnath, since you can kind of save it. You get that life each turn, or kind of manipulate to hit the multiple land drops each turn. Some Teferis. I found Teferi Time Raveler fine, not great, but kind of your more traditional control deck. If you are playing this in best of 1, it may be reasonable to skimp on like a couple counter spells and instead play either like Divine Purge or play Supreme Verdict. The format tends to be a little bit more aggressive. On my version, I was on both Deathrite Shaman as well as Delighted Halfling, so more of a kind of creature-focused version of the deck. But you really take advantage, Mystic Sanctuary in there as well. And then lastly, I'm just going to show you, it's not doing well, but you might see it quite a bit. The Izzet Tempo deck, Blue Moon, is only at 47%. So you kind of lose the effects of black in here. While you have Blood Moons, this version, 22 lands is probably too much for this type of strategy. You can probably go down to like 20, maybe 19. But you've got all your fetch lands, like even the configuration here, 10 fetches. You can play more Steam Vents in here, kind of to edge it with that. But you have Considers should be Brainstorms here. So it's kind of some of the configurations. All these Izzet decks were like sub 50%. So I'm just kind of showing you one as an example. But even here, like you need more interaction. You need your full Unholy Heats. This one's relying too heavy on counter spells, I feel, that if your opponent resolves something, you're kind of far behind. And especially with Bowmasters kind of interacting with you at different speeds, you need to be able to answer to the board as much as possible. You could try out something like Ledger Shredder perhaps, but I think either going Grixis or even maybe Teamer with playing Questing Druid might be more of a reasonable approach. But that is it. Let me know what you've been playing. I've been loving this format. If you want to see gameplay videos, we've done a lot. We started with best of 3. We did some best of 1s, which we included best of 3 sideboards. In best of 3, there's also like the Dimir, Lurrus control decks, like Mistman's been having a lot of success with. So we'll cover those in the next coming days, but the diversity has not been huge right now. So something to just kind of consider as we go through. In any case, thank you for watching. Hope you have a great one. Stay safe out there, and we'll catch you next week. Thanks for watching.